So good morning. So can you just have your presentation? You are Professor Haditsch, and can you just say me your qualification? Just to.
Oh, my qualification. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do this interview for an Italian TV, which is really an honor for me. I am medical doctor. I used to be emergency doctor and general practitioner, then specialized in hygiene, microbiology, infectology and tropical medicine. In parallel, I also did studies in biology. So I did a second study, which helps especially in the field of tropical medicine, parasitology and so on. I have now taken over for the past 12 years being head of a microbiological lab in Hanover in Germany and running a travel medicine clinic and vaccination center here in Austria.
So what motivated me to come to Linz is also, I found it very curious and interesting that a scientist like you are a scientist, no? A doctor and a scientist both, would start to. You produced a very in-depth documentary with Servus TV, and you change your position. You become the interviewer. I mean, you become a journalist. You find this urge to become yourself a journalist in a way. So
well, frankly spoken, I didn't have an urge to do that. But I was asked. You see, I've been in the internet on the so-called new media, with my critical position to the working up of COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2, which means, of course, as a microbiologist, I'm aware of the virus on the one hand, and on the disease COVID-19 on the other hand, but it never ever seemed to justify the measures that were taken against the virus and against the disease. As I was active in the internet, I was approached by a special production, cinema production and documentary production, whether I could do it. And for me, this was a whole new situation, but at the end, of course, I enjoyed it because I had the opportunity to talk to very, very bright people.
You came a very interesting point is the instrumentalization of medicine. I have here, I don't know if you know, or you probably know, Ivan Illich. He was an Austrian philosopher, as you, and he prophesied somehow maybe what we are seeing happening in our time, where medicine is instrumentalized for political ends or financial ends, and and he already prophesied the danger that medicine could become sort of mechanized and dehumanized, and in his famous book, The Medical Nemesis, no? It's an interesting.
Well, you see,
in 76,
he did it, but this is nothing new. Just think about the use of medical knowledge in warfares, biological warfare. This was already 500 years ago. They catapulted dead bodies with plague into in a certain environment, where then the rats and the fleas distributed the bug, and so the population died.
Yes. Exactly.
And the same is true with measles and the indigenous population of America and so on, where by donation of certain goods, the measles virus was transmitted into the indigenous population. So it was always that disease was also abused for political reasons. This is nothing new.
Exactly. Apparently, I just today, this morning, I read this little quote here. Ivan Illich talks about Empress Maria Theresa, and at that time you needed a green pass, a certificate, in order to be tortured. I mean, there was a medical certification so that you were healthy enough to get tortured, and so that your testimony could be reliable. They would issue a certificate. That's quite ironic, no, in the 18th century. But anyway.
Well, I think this is a very good comparison, because actually, if you look into the general feeling of the population, for most of them, what is happening now is torture. It is torture. They're sick. They are depressive. And you see, they cannot see the reason for the things going on. They adhere because there is a lot of power and a lot of pressure on them, but they are not happy. There are just very, very few people who are happy now, and this is due to the reason that most of the people suffer from what's going on.
So, coming back to your extremely articulated documentary, In Search of Truth. So, after all, I think you have toured the globe twice or three times. I don't know. Twice maybe. So, what is the result? Did you come nearer to truth, or did you come to some?
Well, of course, we were a little bit ahead of what's going on, because we had the opportunity to talk to people who have a real in-depth knowledge. Let me just take the example of Professor Wiesenthal in Germany, who already 1 year ago gave an interview and told us that this virus came from a lab. And it's just, I think recently, these days, that there are documents now which were opened up, which were leaked, that Dr. Fauci bribed 4 scientists with millions of dollars to ask them to somehow testify that the virus is of natural origin. You see what I mean?
Exactly.
And we had the real chance to talk to Professor Wiesenthal, the lab origin, which was very important. We had the chance to talk to Dr. Piacori and Professor Peter McCullough, who at that time already had proven that ivermectin works, which is still somehow doubted, and the EMA still prohibits the use of ivermectin. We had the chance to talk with one of the people who invented mRNA, and who is very, very sick upon what is done with mRNA today, Dr. Luigi Warren. And we had also the chance to somehow elaborate on the collateral damages, which we will see in future, because nowadays money is spent like it was nothing, but someday we'll have to pay back. Okay. And in poorer countries, it is earlier that they can't pay back. So the poor suffer from it, and we have been to Guatemala and we've been to Kenya also to show these huge collateral damages, what it does to the population. It's merely the whole population that's suffering from it.
Yes, in fact, also we covered several points, and then we started with you rightly so. You talked about the origin of the virus, which also motivated me at the beginning, because I saw that there was censorship on this issue from the start, from May, no? And it seems to me, of course, there is the frame of the geopolitical struggle between China and the US, and there are some characters in this story which are kind of untouchable. No? You mentioned one, Dr. Fauci. Maybe the other one is Peter Daszak. Yeah. There are people who seems to have some responsibility, but they are not.
It's not true that they are untouchable. They are backed up by very, very mighty and important people, but it won't help.
You think so?
Truth will prevail, and I'm very sure. I'm very sure. You see, there are many also in political terms, very important people in the US who now they challenge Dr. Fauci, and the leak that his emails were leaked, and that there are bonds to various organizations, including the WIV, the Wuhan, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. You see, and that there was sponsorship of the work that is done there, and so on. This all will help to get closer to the truth. Maybe we won't find the real truth, because the three crucial questions which are about this lab origin is: did the virus sneak out of the lab in Wuhan? Which could happen, because the safety issues in this lab were criticized in many terms. Was it set free intentionally, or was it somebody else who brought it to Wuhan in China and set it free close to the Wuhan Institute of Virology just to blame the Chinese? So these are three options. Maybe we will never know what is the real truth. But what is more or less proven with a likelihood of 99.8% is it's out of a lab. So there must have been some crazy-minded persons who did these kind of experiments. And as I already told in another interview, for sure, and this is in my basic competence, all the biosafety level 4 laboratories on the earth should be registered and should be audited in regular terms, and there should not a single person should be able to do experiments like that, which means gain of function.
Exactly. Well, one of the untouchable maybe is also Tedros, the head of the WHO. Maybe could be one. He seems to be on the list to be re-elected again in May.
Yeah, you see, of course, there's a very, very powerful network, and they know it's like in a domino game. If one of the bricks falls, they will take over all the others, and there are all others who have a big interest to keep Tedros in this position. So the question is, do we need a WHO like that, which obviously is corrupted, yeah? And which is financed mainly out of private sources, and one of the big players, as you know, is Bill Gates. So this kind of interconnection of global health to private interests, I think per se is a big problem.
So coming back to the pandemic, so there are 3 points. Maybe you can say something about what is your result of your research about the lockdown measures and the segregation of non-vaccinated people, all these measures, social measures. It seems that you toured the globe and you found different results in different countries.
You see, despite the fact that I'm being specialist in epidemiology, there are, on a global scale, there are people by far better than myself, by far. And one of the epicenters of knowledge is Stanford in the US. And there are people like the Nobel Prize awardee, Professor Michael Levitt, and there are people there like Professor Bhattacharya or Professor Ioannidis. And they have published, and I have no reason to doubt their results. They have published papers that say all the measures taken, they have no impact on under the bottom line, on the evolution of the pandemic. So they compared many countries, those with a very strict lockdown, those with some kind of a lockdown, and those with no lockdown, and the result was the same, which indicates it barely has no effect. It might shift the whole thing a little bit, which is then called flatten the curve. But you see, if you have flattened the curve, there's no more need to proceed with it. And so what is actually going on now has merely no scientific basis. you might happen to know that in most of the countries on the earth, there is simply not the substance, the financial substance, that, for instance, the masks are for free. In many areas, they have to buy it. People don't have the money to buy it, which ends up at the maximum that a village or a neighborhood in Africa, they own one mask. And the person going out takes the mask and brings it back. And if another one has to go out, he takes the same mask to go out, because they are forced to use a mask. You see, this is, and there is no explosion of infections there. So obviously the using of the masks has no real substance. And I still wonder, you see, as you know, there were some kind of wordings indicating that in future Africa will see hundreds of millions of deaths due to the pandemic and so on. It didn't happen. Of course there are deaths. There are always deaths associated with infectious diseases which have a certain amount of severity or what we call this case fatality rate. This might be, but it was not more than before. And as far as I know, the data indicate that in 2020, where there were no vaccines and only these measures, which were not taken in many of those countries in the right way, there was no excessive death rate on a global scale.
Exactly.
There were the same death rates as always. So I cannot see this kind of pandemic killing so many people.
And we came to talk about first cures. We mentioned, I think, just briefly, ivermectin, which has been, I think, I've seen on the mainstream, both in Italy and in Austria. They always laugh. Ivermectin is only for horses. Yeah. It's a horse and it's dangerous. But I have many friends in Italy and in India, maybe you have, who have all used ivermectin successfully in the once they got infected. So what did you find out in your research?
Yeah, you see, it's not only the research, because I always, of course, I had also to check the background. So I'm quite familiar with what is going on with ivermectin. These strange perceptions of ivermectin in Central Europe are due to the fact that we don't suffer from parasitic intestinal diseases, or not only intestinal, from parasitic diseases, because we have, in these terms, a quite clean environment. I don't take smog and these things, but in terms of infections. So ivermectin is mostly used in tropical countries where these diseases are more common, and we only use it for a skin disease which is caused by it's scabies. It's by a little bug. In these terms, we can use it, and there is a drug also licensed to treat it. And this drug contains ivermectin, but it's only for that. But what people then tend to believe is, well, where do we use ivermectin commonly? And this is in animals, of course, because animals, also in Central Europe, tend to have parasites. So by far, the vast majority of the drug is used in veterinary medicine and not in human medicine. But what maybe people don't know is that for use in humans, not as a veterinary drug, ivermectin got, or the inventor of ivermectin got the Nobel Prize in 2015. So there is a Nobel Prize awardee for finding and working on the drug called ivermectin. And there are publications back in the era before Corona, where studies were done on ivermectin and its anti-infectious action. And it could be proven that it also acts on viral diseases. Before Corona, it was already proven, for instance, dengue fever, which is a viral disease. So this is nothing new. The only new thing was that being desperate about how to treat corona, there were trials of many medications, because if it had been this extremely deadly disease, you should grasp every chance to treat it, and by these means it was also that ivermectin was just tried out, and it was successful. But of course nobody has the intention to do big studies on an old drug where the daily price of treatment in India is $1.8. Nobody has. I mean, even the producers, Merck, said you should not use ivermectin to treat corona. But they worked on a twin drug, which is almost the same as it, and they can sell it for hundreds of dollars. You see, it's always about money, and there is no financial interest in promoting ivermectin.
The same happened with hydroxychloroquine before, which is maybe less effective than ivermectin, but
yes, you might be true. I mean, I would have loved to get more information on that. We tried repeatedly to touch base with Professor Didier Raoult in Marseille, because he's one of those who really has a vast experience in dealing with this, and I would have loved to have an interview with him. He's involved in dozens of studies proving the benefit of hydroxychloroquine, but what also everybody should know is it's not a single miracle drug. Neither hydroxychloroquine nor ivermectin. It is always part of a treatment regimen where other drugs must be in as well. So if you have single drug studies comparing ivermectin or no ivermectin, maybe you won't find a significant difference, but maybe you won't find a significant difference in the survival rate in persons on the intensive care unit if you say oxygen or no oxygen. It's just part of the treatment. And if you have this part of the treatment, you will get convincing results.
Yeah, of course, in Italy, the protocol issued by the Ministry of Health was just tachypyrine, which is paracetamol, and wait.
Yeah, I know, but you might happen to know that especially in the northern part of Italy, which was severely affected by the first wave of COVID-19 in the beginning of 2020, there were heads of departments of intensive care medicine who just rejected the proposition of the Ministry of Health, and they did their own thing. And they linked up internationally, and they developed protocols which are now well respected and which really help to survive. The real problem is that this kind of sit and wait in the preclinical phase is one of the major issues contributing to the severity of the disease, because of course you should make early treatment, and early treatment is not only some anti-inflammatory drug, but it's a composition of many drugs. And if you do that, if you follow these protocols, which are for instance also visible on the homepage of the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, FLCCC. So if you go to the internet, you will find a protocol for early treatment. And by applying this kind of early treatment, you can reduce the need of hospitalization by 80 to 90%. So this is highly effective. And it's also used in some Latin American countries, in India and so on.
So, and so let's open up the subject of which is the hot subject, which is the vaccines, of course.
We don't have vaccines.
We don't have vaccines. And I just read yesterday that Sweden is recommending against vaccination of children between 5 and 11. So what did you research? Find out on it. So first, what is your point? There is no vaccine. I mean, they are fake vaccine, let's say, or they are not a so-called vaccine.
It's so-called. I really insist that we differentiate in between vaccines and these spiking substances, because the whole immunological process, which is linked to the application of these formulations, is different. And as you might happen to know, I'm absolutely pro-vax. We are doing this interview here in my vaccination center.
Exactly.
Yeah? So I'm absolutely pro-vax, but I'm against spiking. It would be too long now to elaborate in detail on the difference, but just to give you one idea, everybody talks about these spiking substances being inactivated vaccines. But if you have inactivated vaccines, you have to really indicate exactly which dose of working agent provoking immunoreaction you provide. This is very, 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 very important. If you provide those spiking agents, you don't know in which cells will mRNA penetrate, in which time interval will this happen, which amount of spike antigen will be produced by these cells, which of this amount will be set free to the immune system so that it can react, within which time period. So this is all unclear. And by the way, the spike antigen, and this is very specific for these products against SARS-CoV-2, per se has proven to be toxic. So there are scientific reasons not to talk about these substances as vaccines. And if we just change the wording, mandatory vaccines will go to nothing. You can do mandatory vaccines for measles, like it is, for instance, in Italy and in Germany for special age groups. But this has nothing to do with the spiking process.
So you're talking about the RNA vaccine now?
Yeah, but also in the...
Also the adenovirus?
The same is in the adenovirus.
Like
the only difference in between the vector vaccine and the mRNA vaccine is the kind, how you wrap it up. Mm-hmm. So, in one case it's nanoparticles, which by the way are not licensed for human use. Yeah? And in the other way, it's an adenovirus that contains the mRNA of the SARS-CoV-2. But both release mRNA in the inner part of the body cell to get transcripted into the protein we call a spike protein of SARS-CoV-2
Yes, I've seen you were talking about the nanolipid, which it was one company which it was first written that it's not only used for laboratory. Then they changed, when they came out, they changed their website.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a story.
In the beginning, there are some chemical producers of these nanoparticles, and in the beginning it held two sentences, and the one was for research use only, not for human use. And the sentence "not for human use" now disappeared.
Yeah.
So after I would say the lay people became aware of it and looked it up, yes. Then it disappeared.
But at least you would say the so-called vaccine campaign helped a little bit in saving some in mitigating the effects of the infection in some countries. even this, I must say, we will have to check the data in future. I'm not really sure about it. I mean, you might also here have some kind of delay in the process, but if it really saved lives under the bottom line, I'm not sure. I would love to see this effect, but I'm not sure. And it's quite simple. You know that the spike protein is just one out of 25 or 30 antigens which are on the surface, which are characterizing the virus SARS-CoV-2. So it's just one. And it's even strange
that this one antigen was used for vaccine production, so-called vaccine production, while knowing that this is the antigen most likely to shift, to mutate. So all the so-called new mutations, like we had with the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, now omicron, are mostly mutations of the spike protein. So we are still producing our bodies, if we get injected by these mRNA or vector shots, we're still producing spike protein of the Wuhan virus, while we have the risk to get infected by one of the mutations. This won't work in the way we hope that it works. And now with Omicron being the most dominant kind of SARS-CoV-2 in most of the countries, we don't see any more benefit of those spiking substances, which is also a quite logical and natural evolution. I mean, this is nothing new. If you have a pandemic which tends to mutate because we have an RNA virus and they are by far more likely to mutate. And if you then interfere on the immunological basis, it is mandatory, it's logical that you will produce so-called escape mutations, which are not blocked off by the immunization status. So it was quite logical that Omicron appeared. And if you have vaccines, maybe in future, maybe real vaccines, not only this kind of substances focused on Omicron, you will have others. And the virus is always one step ahead. It's not like a competition. It's always ahead. We do have now some, I think, tens of thousands of mutations. Yeah? We only know about those 5 or 6, and some people who are more interested in it will see that there are also other Greek letters indicating certain strains which did not appear on the surface now, but which are only known to scientists. But under the bottom line, we will always be behind. And so it's as from my perception, it was the biggest fault to indicate mass vaccination. If we had only vaccinated, and hopefully with a good substance, those risk groups, there wouldn't have been this kind of pressure on viral evolution, and maybe we would still have other strains circulating which could be affected by immunology. But now we are something like on a dead end, and I don't see a really good indication for further adapted vaccines, whatever they may be, because the virus, for God's sake, follows the regular and natural way, which what we call attenuation. So it still is infective, or it gets even a little bit more infective, but the case fatality rate drops. It's not as pathogenic as it used to be. So in future, whether you want to vaccinate against common cold or not, whether it's worth to develop a vaccine against a mild disease, I mean, it's up to the pharmaceutical industry, but
exactly. So all the pillars on which the legislation now stands in Italy and in Austria about obligatory vaccination, and especially this pressure, this pressure on the young generation and the children to get vaccinated because otherwise they cannot take part to social life. It's very troubling, I think, and I don't understand how people can sleep comfortably when they know that the young generation is pushed to do take this experimental so-called vaccination which they don't really need. This is
it even goes further. You see, it even goes further, and this is my big concern. We are dealing with drugs that were developed on a fast track. They always said that telescoping the study phases will help you to gain time. But you may turn it each way you want. The phase 3 is at least 2 years. So with an observation time of 2 months, if you telescoped whatever you want, you will never fulfill this criteria. And the problem is, as we have a wholly new concept of development of these products, we cannot somehow compare these shots to traditional vaccines. And we cannot anticipate adverse reactions. It's simply not possible. And if you now try to check these adverse reactions, I mean, it's also displayed on the homepage of the WHO. You could check the EMA, the European Medical Agency. You could check the VERS data, this Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System in the US and so on. Wherever you look, you will see that the adverse reactions to these products now used to fight COVID-19 by far outnumber all the other adverse reactions by all the other vaccines for 20 or more years. So it's such a huge amount of adverse reactions and a huge amount of deaths associated with the application of these drugs that we also should consider this problem when we talk about jabbing anybody, and especially young healthy people who don't suffer from the disease usually. So this is a whole misconception, and I cannot see a medical and somehow, let's say, logical reason why people support this kind of strategy. The only way I tended to acknowledge the position was when pediatricians said young people are suffering such a lot from isolation and from breaking up with friendship and all that, from no more being able to participate in social life, that vaccinating them could help to overcome their psychological disorders. You see, this might be reasonable, but everybody should know that there is a price to pay for that. And the price is acute reactions we actually see. In young men, myocarditis, young people are dying from it. You see? And this is a part of the price you have to pay for it. And, of course, they still have a very long time to live, hopefully. And this is also the time where delayed adverse reactions might have their manifestations. So there might be wholly new diseases we don't know now. We know 2 of those already. The one is the VIT, the vaccination-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, which is a clotting disorder, which is produced by these jabs. And the other thing is V8, this is vaccination-induced acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which means this is a lack of immunological reactions which are produced by jabbing. So the jabs, they suppress the immune system. But we will have other diseases still to come. And we don't know which, yes. And we don't know when. You see, that's a real problem.
Montagnier, when he went to Milan, he said, actually, I don't know what he meant, the unvaccinated people might save the vaccinated, because
yes, of course.
Maybe it was a paradox.
I had a very simple thing. In my lab in Germany, I usually work overtime because there's a lot of work, and I love my work, so I have hours in the evening where I'm still working. I said, maybe they have to recognize that I will leave the lab in time, because there might be times when I leave the lab to go to the hospital to help out. Because the people who are working in healthcare were the first to be forced to take the jabs. So it's not only that the number of people being available for the service in healthcare diminish, but they themselves might need help. You see? So there could be a gap which gets broader and broader between those who can provide healthcare service and those who are in need. I still hope, really, and I pray that it won't happen. But if it happens, it would be plausible based on the data we now have.
Because the immune system is weakened could be damaged.
Yes, there are some publications, even prominent publications in good journals like the British Medical Journal, that indicate that you have a drop in immune cells after getting the jabs. And we see it in real life as well. For instance, we see quite a steep increase in herpes zoster, which is a reactivation of the varicella zoster virus. And this reactivation is only possible if the immune system drops. So if you have a lower immune response, this virus takes its chance and multiplies, and the result is herpes zoster. And we see an increase in that. We see other diseases. I mean, we see that people who got the jabs at least as frequently got infected now by Omicron as non-jabbed people. So this could also be, despite having maybe a high titer against a high amount of antibodies against spike protein, but they still get infected. So it is a mismatch. It doesn't fit.
Yes. So at the end of the day, this mandatory vaccination, it's only on the agenda at the moment, from what I know, in Austria and in Italy still. In Italy only after 50. They will introduce it by the 15th of February. It seems that there are no foundation, no scientific or medical basis to keep on. Why only Austria and Italy? Why Austria is kind of the leading? I mean, otherwise you have to go to Tajikistan or other countries.
No, you see. I think
some explanation.
Yeah, I think. But this is just out of the guts. I have no data for that, and I have no proof. Mm-hmm. But also that seems logical. You might happen to know that Israel had very good bonds to some pharmaceutical industries, like Pfizer. Mm-hmm. And it was the boss of Pfizer who said, Israel is the biggest experimental lab in the world to prove the action of these so-called vaccines. So obviously, they decided to use this country to start this kind of experiment. Austria is a small country, and if you want to somehow have a test run, then you won't go to the big countries first. You will try to identify a country that was in your line till now, and then you could say, okay, so the next step is mandatory vaccination. Which country should we choose? Well, Austria, they behaved quite nicely in the past in adhering to the rules which were given. They never questioned it. They adhered to the lockdowns, to the masks, whatever. So the next step is the mandatory vaccine. Let's try it in Austria. And if it works in Austria, we could roll it out to other countries. This is what I think. And till now, it worked. But as we talk, by today, which is end of January, I think this whole concept starts to collapse. You see, we have with even a checklist which was provided by the highest court of Austria and which was sent to the Austrian Ministry of Health, and they have to answer questions. And these are crucial questions. And these are questions how, under the bottom line, the Austrian government in general and the Austrian Ministry of Health in detail want to justify what they did to the Austrian population. So this is quite interesting. And I think, and this is my big hope, and by then I would become a proud Austrian again, that Austrian is the first domino piece to fall. Because if it won't work in Austria, it would become increasingly difficult to do that in Italy, as you mentioned, and even more in Germany, where they are already discussing about it. So I think we have now a very, very important role to play, and the rallies against it are becoming stronger and stronger. And from my point of view, it will be very hard to insist in the mandatory vaccination in Austria. Yeah. I don't think it will work.
The problem is the media, no? Because I've seen also that the media, apart from Servus TV, it's monotone, one-sided. For example, I see Austrian TV keeps saying this lie that that we need mandatory vaccination here because the Austrian vaccination rate is lower than anywhere else, but it actually by now is higher than in United Kingdom, and in the United Kingdom they don't even think about mandatory vaccination.
Well, I think the public Austrian Broadcasting Corporation will also be challenged in future by also on basis of on legal aspects, because they have the duty to provide unbiased data, and we pay for it. But this is nothing which is unique for Austria. This is a global problem, and the big broadcasting corporations, they all provide the same kind of informations, and at least with one of the Swiss international broadcasting corporations, it was proven that they got some kind of order how to provide the information. So the goes and the no-goes. So they were, it was simply kind of censorship which was mandatory in some of those broadcasting corporations. But you see, we try to keep an eye on the media also in Austria. And in the recent past, I recognized a very, very slow and soft and discreet shift. And now some of the newspapers are willing to publish critical letters to the editor, critical articles. Even in the news in Austria, there's a slow shift. For instance, on also providing information on the rallies. Some half year ago, they always focused on the riots in terms of those where some bad guys tried to blow up the rallies, and now they report on it that it was mostly peaceful and so on. So there is a slow shift. There's a slow shift, and I hope it will go on, because under the bottom line, it's also the honor and the ethical code of the journalists which part they take, because history won't forget.
Yeah.
And what we have now in the media will be challenged tomorrow.
But compared to Italy, in Austria, you have the advantage of having two political parties, I think. I mean, one big one, which the FPÖ, the Liberal Party, which are against or are critical to the health measures. Instead, in Italy, there is no political party who dares to criticize really or really protest against we have some intellectual though, based on the University of Turin, some famous philosophers and some doctors, they constructed a counterpole of information in Turin at the University of Turin, but there is no political party which is dares only to criticize or to have a critical position.
I know that this is a real problem in Italy, and the problem is because of, and this is what I already stated, the solution to the problem we have cannot be medical, because there is no medical reason for what's going on now. The solution cannot be legal, because the legal system was really some kind of erased in many of the democracies, and it does not work as it used to work. The only solution is a political solution, and as long as you have no political counterpart to what's going on, it will become very hard. But you know that Italy is embedded, and I'm very happy for that, in a multinational layer. So, we have this axis of Germany, Austria, Italy, which already in the past was not the real good one, and they might be what we call last man standing. But you know, last man standing is not always for the good. It could also mean that these are the people who simply won't accept reality. So it's some kind of a mind disease that could be diagnosed by then, and I'm quite sure and confident that earlier or later they will have to join the countries which act rational by then.
Yes. The thing is, what is your, if you read in Italy, there's a big scandal now also about some unvaccinated people who have been refused to get cured or get their operation in the hospital because they were unvaccinated. I was wondering if it happens in Austria as well. On the basis they are not, they don't have the super green pass or the green pass.
It's incredible, it's inhumane, and it's against what we call the oath of Hippocrates. So people refusing to help those people are severely violating the medical code of ethics. They will have to justify their action in future, I'm sure, and we will have a lot of legal aspects to take into account in future. And yes, I fear that also not only few but many doctors will get sued.
Yes. And of course, then in Italy, of course, this hate campaign against the unvaccinated has been very, very strong and has polarized the society enormously.
Well, you're you're representing the old Roman Empire. You're coming from Italy, and you for sure are aware of one of the big psychological statements which reads divide et impera,
Exactly.
So divide and rule. And this is what is done now, and it was always, you have to find a special part of the population which is the enemy, yeah? So you can focus on that, you can try to tighten all the negative emotions on this very group, and you can distract from all the problems you generate, because you have an enemy, and this enemy has to be fought. And now it's clear the enemy now are the unvaccinated, which perfectly fits into this kind of evil system. But the real good thing is those guiding now this kind of strategy have no idea, no at all, about the population. And you know, the population, they are not silly. They are increasingly aware of that something is going on. Maybe some cannot identify what is going on. It's very strange that if you look and check who adheres most to the rules, it's the so-called well-educated part of the society. The reason being, they want to be framed as foolish or whatever. Those on the basis of the population don't care what is talked about them. They know what's going on, and they are aware of what it is. So they don't care if somebody says they are not educated, whatever. They know what is right and they know what is wrong. And they got the feeling a lot of things are wrong now. So I really want to express my really deep respect for those people who are now standing up and who don't fall into the lies and this kind of mismanagement and distraction which is now produced by the help of the media and tries to manipulate the population. Mm-hmm. They are really great.
Yeah, do you think so? It's a kind of, because it's, as you said, it's a global organization who is or maybe pushing this agenda. Do you have some ideas or some speculation?
Well, you see,
or it's just for money, just for interest, it's just a conflict of interest, as we say, or a combination of finance and pharmaceutical, or all those things together, maybe.
You see, I'm no politician. I'm not used to deal with global tactics, whatever. I'm just a simple medical doctor. But of course, I try to watch what is going on. If this happened in Upper Austria only, I would say, well, that's strange. Who is in charge of organizing that? Well, it's the government of Upper Austria. Because, for instance, all the Upper Austrian newspapers, all the media, they write the same. If this was Austria only, I would say, that's the Austrian government. If this was Europe only, I would say, well, that's the EU. But as it is global, it must be something global. Otherwise, it would not work.